Sound, paper sliding across marble. Garrett stands tall, jacket pressed, eyes avoiding hers. Garrett, voice light, like discussing the weather. My mother's attorney drew it up. It's just a formality. Claire, eyes fixed on the page, voice cold as stone, a formality. Your mother wants 51% controlling interest for 20 years. Irrevocable. Garrett, glancing at the jacket on the chair, still not meeting her eyes. It protects the family assets. Claire sets the document down, slowly. Which family, Garrett? Silence. Outside a car passes, a dog barks twice. Life is still happening, just not in this kitchen. Cut to the bridal shower. A woman walks in not on the guest list. She scans the room until she finds Claire, then smiles. Not the congratulatory kind. Claire internally, hands still unwrapping gifts, voice utterly steady. I know exactly what that smile means. Cut to the dark kitchen table. Claire sits alone. In front of her, two versions of a contract, a yellow legal pad, and a phone that has already dialed the attorney's office. Claire whispering to her 7-month belly, I already know. I've already handled it. 9 days before the wedding, 214 guests, flowers she spent 4 months choosing, and a pregnant woman sitting alone reading legal documents at 5 in the morning. This is the story of what she did next and why none of them saw it coming. Stay until the end because the way she handled it will leave you speechless. The sound came first. Paper, sliding across marble, a soft, deliberate sound. The kind that means someone put something down and wants you to notice. Claire Harmon did not look up right away. She was 7 months pregnant. She had learned to move slowly. Everything took longer now. Sitting, standing, breathing, even turning around. She set her coffee cup on the counter. Decaf. Always decaf now. She turned. Garrett was already dressed. Too dressed for a Saturday morning. Pressed white shirt. Dark slacks. His jacket draped over the kitchen chair like he had somewhere important to be. Somewhere he hadn't mentioned yet. On the table between them was a document with a blue cover sheet. The kind lawyers use. What is this? Claire asked. My mother had her attorney draw it up, Garrett said. It's just a formality. She picked it up. She read the first page. Then she read it again. The words did not change. Harmon Family Trust Asset Management Agreement. In the event of marriage between Garrett Allen Harmon and Claire Elizabeth Nolan, controlling interest of the Harmon Family Trust shall remain at 51% in the name of Dolores Ann Harmon, irrevocable for a period of no less than 20 years from date of marriage. Claire set the document down, very carefully, Garrett. It's just how my mother protects the family assets, he said. It's standard. Standard. She said the word like she was tasting it, finding it wrong. Your mother wants controlling interest in our marriage. In the trust, he said. Not the marriage. She looked at him. He looked at the jacket on the chair. Something stirred. Some small, quiet, persistent thing that had lived at the back of Claire's mind for 2 years now. It stirred and opened its eyes and looked around. She was 29 years old. She was 7 months pregnant with their daughter. The wedding was 11 days away. 214 guests. A venue in the hill country. Flowers she had spent 4 months choosing. She picked up her coffee cup again. It had gone cold. She drank it anyway. This is fine, she told herself. There is an explanation. There is always an explanation. But her hands were not quite steady, and Garrett still hadn't looked at her. She asked him who else had seen the document. His mother's attorney drafted it, he said. She asked if he had signed it. He paused, just a half second too long. Not yet, he said. She noted the word yet. She filed it carefully. The way she filed everything. Numbers, discrepancies, things that didn't quite add up. She was a bookkeeper by trade. She had been reading financial statements since she was 23. She knew what a red flag looked like. She had just spent 2 years becoming very good at explaining them away. Who asked for this clause specifically, she said. You or your mother? Claire. It's a simple question. He ran a hand through his hair. My mother's attorney suggested it, as part of an overall estate restructuring. It protects everyone. It protects your mother, Claire said. For 20 years, irrevocably. It protects the family assets. Which family? He didn't answer. She stood very still and let the silence sit there between them. Outside, a car passed. A dog barked twice. The ordinary Saturday morning sounds of a neighborhood that didn't know anything was wrong. The breathing room came early, before the scene could escalate too fast. Because that was how Claire worked. She didn't explode. She never had. She processed. She organized. She gave herself time to understand what she was actually dealing with before she let herself feel it completely. I need some air, she said. She walked to the back door. She stepped onto the porch. The morning was already warm, the September air thick with the smell of cut grass from somewhere down the street. She stood at the railing and looked at the yard. Marigolds. Zinnias. One determined rosebush along the back fence. She had planted all of them herself. She'd been tending this yard for 2 years. In 11 days, she was supposed to stop calling it her yard and start calling it theirs. She put one hand on her belly. The baby moved, a slow rolling motion. Hello, Mama. I'm here. I know, Claire whispered. I know you're here. She stood there until her breathing evened out. Then she went back inside. Garrett was still in the kitchen. He hadn't moved. I want to understand something, she said. When did your mother first talk to you about this document? He looked at the table. A few weeks ago. A few weeks. She wanted to make sure everything was in order before the wedding. And you didn't think to mention it to me. I didn't want to stress you out. She almost laughed. Almost. Because she was 7 months pregnant and planning a wedding for 214 people and managing 3 client accounts from home. And this man had been holding a document that would define their financial future for a few weeks without saying a single word. He didn't want to stress her out. She looked at him steadily. I need you to leave that document on the table, she said. Don't put it in your briefcase. Don't take it with you. I want to read it completely before we talk further. He hesitated. Garrett. Okay, he said. She watched him button his jacket, pick up his keys, move toward the door like a man who is relieved to be leaving. Garrett, she said again. He paused, hand on the doorframe. Where are you going? I have a thing, he said. I'll be back by 2. A thing. He didn't specify. And somehow in this moment, with this document on this table, the vagueness of a thing landed differently than it ever had before. She heard the door close. She heard his car start. She sat down at the kitchen table. She pulled the document toward her. She opened her laptop. She typed, prenuptial agreement, controlling interest clause, legality, Texas. She read for 45 minutes. When she closed the laptop, her hands were very still. I need to talk to Beth, she thought. She picked up her phone. She dialed. Beth picked up on the second ring. And before Claire had finished her first sentence, Beth said, he wants you to sign something. I knew it. Tell me everything. Beth Caldwell had been Claire's best friend since they were 19 years old. They met working the same summer job at a resort hotel outside Austin. Beth was the one who taught Claire to fold a fitted sheet. Claire was the one who helped Beth study for her real estate license. They had seen each other through 2 miscarriages, Beth's. In her first marriage, 1 short and merciful divorce, and 1,000 ordinary Tuesday afternoons that mattered more than either of them could say. Beth arrived 40 minutes after the phone call. She brought tacos from the place on Anderson and an expression Claire knew well, the one that meant, I have been organizing my thoughts in the car and I have things to say. They sat at the kitchen table. Beth put her phone face down between them. Before I show you something, Beth said, I need you to promise me you're going to hear me out before you defend him. Beth, promise me. Claire looked at her. Okay, I promise. Beth turned the phone over, a screenshot Instagram. A woman named Sandra Whitfield, tagged at dinner at a restaurant downtown. The caption said celebrating a promotion. 4 people in the photo, candid, laughing. One of them was Garrett. His arm was around Sandra Whitfield's shoulder. She was leaning into him, not the way a colleague leans, not the way a friend leans, the other way. Claire looked at the photo. She looked at it for a long time. That could be, she started. Look at his hand, Beth said quietly, his left hand. Claire looked. No ring. They weren't married yet, he didn't wear a ring. But he wore the silver bracelet she gave him for his 32nd birthday. The hammered silver one from the little shop on South Congress. The one he said he never took off. He was not wearing the bracelet in this photo. When did you find this? Claire asked. 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks? I've been trying to figure out how to tell you. Claire set the phone down. Something in her chest became very quiet, very orderly. The part of her that managed spreadsheets and client accounts and complicated tax situations clicked into gear. Collect data. Be systematic. Don't react until you have all the information. Who is she? Claire said. She works at his company, Acquisitions. How long has she worked there? At least 2 years, maybe more. Have you heard her name before? Beth hesitated. Nora Sims, you remember Nora? She used to work with Garrett? She mentioned a Sandra once. About a year ago. I didn't think anything of it at the time. A year ago. Their daughter was due in 2 months. Claire did the math she didn't want to do. She stood up. She walked to the back door. She stood on the porch with both hands on the railing and looked at her marigolds and breathed. The mirror technique moment arrived here. Small and specific and universal. She checked her phone 3 times. Lock. Unlock. Lock. Unlock. Lock. No messages, no explanations arriving on their own. She went back inside. Tell me everything you know, she said. Beth had done research. This was one of the things Claire loved most about Beth Caldwell. When something needed investigating, Beth investigated. Thoroughly. Without apology. Sandra Whitfield, 31 years old. 5 years at Garrett's company. Promoted to senior acquisitions analyst 8 months ago. Active on social media. Gym, brunch, travel. The normal life of a woman who didn't appear to be doing anything wrong, except for the arm, and the lean, and the missing bracelet. There's something else, Beth said. She pulled up another screenshot. An Instagram story. Sandra and a group of women at what looked like a work function. In the background, slightly blurred, standing near the bar, Garrett, looking at Sandra. Not the way you look at a colleague. That story was posted 11 months ago, Beth said. By someone else in the photo, not Sandra, 11 months ago. Claire did the math again. I need you to do something for me, Claire said. I need you to call Nora Sims. Beth was quiet for a moment. Okay. Ask her what she knows about Sandra Whitfield. Ask her why she really left that company. Beth looked at her carefully. You think there's more? I think there's a lot more, Claire said. And I think I've been not looking at it for a very long time. She picked up the document from the table, the blue cover sheet, the 51%. She held it in both hands. God, she thought, I was so stupid. No. She stopped herself. She corrected herself. Firmly and specifically, I wasn't stupid. I was organized about looking away. I built an entire filing system for explainable things. I was very efficient at ignoring what I didn't want to see. That was worse than stupid. That was chosen. But she was choosing differently now. She set the document down. I'm going to need a lawyer, she said. Beth nodded. I know someone. Of course you do. His name is Douglas Reeves. He's very good, very calm. You'll like him. Claire poured herself a glass of water. She drank it standing at the counter. Outside, the marigolds bobbed in a small wind. She thought about her daughter, the specific weight of her, the way she moved at night, slow and deliberate, as though she was already thinking things through. I'm going to figure this out, she told her silently. Before you get here, I'm going to figure this out. The validation whisper arrived here, quietly. Not a question, a statement. I deserve better than this. My daughter deserves better than this. She said it only inside her head, but she said it clearly. She said it like she meant it, because she did. Garrett came home at 2:15. He brought flowers, Gerber daisies, orange and pink. The grocery store kind, still wrapped in cellophane with a price sticker on the front. He held them out with the expression she had seen him use on his mother when he'd done something Dolores didn't like. Sheepish, pre-apologetic, hoping the gesture would be enough. For you, he said. Thank you, Claire said. She put them in water. She trimmed the stems at a diagonal. She did it with her back to him, calm and methodical. How was your morning, he asked. Quiet, she said. I read the document. He went still. All of it, she added. I also did some research. She turned around. She leaned against the counter with the daisies beside her and looked at him directly. Tell me something, she said. When did your mother first discuss restructuring the trust with her attorney? He sat down at the table. Claire, this doesn't need to be a whole thing. When, Garrett? He looked at his hands. 6 months ago. Maybe 7. 6 months ago. She was already pregnant 6 months ago. She noted that. She filed it. And the original prenuptial agreement we discussed, she said. The one we agreed on in principle 14 months ago. Does it contain this clause? It's been updated since? Does the original contain this clause? Silence. No, he said. So your mother's attorney added it, as part of an estate restructuring, Garrett. Her voice was very even. I'm not arguing with you right now. I'm asking you to confirm facts so I understand what I'm looking at. Can you do that for me? He looked up. Something in his expression shifted, like he wasn't sure what kind of conversation this was. Yes, he said. The clause was added in the updated draft. Thank you, she said. That's all I needed to know for now. She picked up her glass of water. She walked to the bedroom. She closed the door. Not a slam. A click, quiet and final. And she sat on the edge of the bed and thought about a woman named Sandra Whitfield and a silver bracelet that was missing from a man's wrist and a document that had been sitting in a briefcase for weeks. She thought about how much she had not been looking at, and she thought, it stops now. Memory is not kind. When it comes back all at once, it doesn't arrive softly. It doesn't knock. It floods in through every crack at the same time, and suddenly you are standing in water up to your chest, wondering how you didn't notice the tide coming in. Claire stood in the shower the next morning and let the memories come. 3 years ago, a mutual friend's birthday party, a rooftop bar on the east side. She had been single for 2 years after a relationship that ended slowly and painfully, the way those relationships do. She was ready for something different, someone attentive, someone who listened. Garrett Harmon walked across that rooftop like he was looking for something specific, and he found her by the railing, holding a drink she wasn't really drinking, watching the city below. He said, "You look like you're calculating something." She said, "I'm a bookkeeper. I'm always calculating something." He laughed, a real laugh. She remembered thinking, that's a real laugh. He actually thinks that's funny. He stayed by the railing for 2 hours. He called her the next day. He called her the day after that. She fell in love with the speed of it, with being chosen that clearly, that decisively. After years of uncertainty, here was a man who knew what he wanted. She believed that. She held on to it. She holds it in the shower now and feels it differently. He knew what he wanted. He just didn't want only her. 2 years, 8 months ago, she met Dolores Harmon for the first time. A dinner at a restaurant in Westlake. The kind of restaurant with cloth napkins and a wine list that came in a leather binder. Dolores was 60 at the time. Precise in the way of women who have spent decades managing their presentation. Silver hair, good jewelry, a handshake that assessed you while it greeted you. She looked at Claire the way an appraiser looks at a property. Not warmly, not even neutrally, The look that means I'm still deciding if this is worth acquiring. Claire told herself that first impressions could be wrong, that Garrett's mother was protective because she loved her son. That warmth sometimes came slowly. She kept telling herself this for 2 years. 2 years, 4 months ago. Their anniversary. The first one, she had made a reservation at a place on the east side. Candles, the tasting menu. She'd worn a dress she loved. He called it 7:15. His mother needed him. A property dispute with a neighbor. Something about a shared fence in the survey line. Dolores had worked herself into a state, and Garrett was the only one who could calm her down. He was sorry. He would make it up to her. He loved her. She made her own dinner that night. She sat at the kitchen table and ate pasta she had cooked for two, and told herself that a man who was devoted to his mother was a good man, that family first was a value, that she was being selfish for minding. She had been very good at talking herself into things. 20 months ago, the first mention of a prenuptial agreement, Garrett brought it up casually, over breakfast, like it was his idea. Like it had occurred to him independently. She agreed. She didn't love it. But she understood. His family had money, real estate. A trust she'd heard mentioned but never fully explained. She had a job she was good at and a reasonable amount of savings. A prenuptial agreement made sense. She didn't ask whose idea it really was. She didn't ask why it came up exactly when it did. She should have asked, 14 months ago. The engagement. He proposed on a Tuesday, which surprised her. She expected a Saturday, a special occasion, something planned. Instead, it was a Tuesday evening. He came home with a ring and got down on one knee in the kitchen. The ring was beautiful, a round solitaire, classic.
Perfect for her hands.
She said yes before he finished asking. Afterward, he mentioned that his mother had helped choose the ring. She said how thoughtful. She meant it. She didn't think about why Dolores was involved in choosing her engagement ring. She didn't ask. 10 months ago, the rehearsal dinner seating chart. She had been managing the guest list on a shared spreadsheet, organized by table, color-coded by family connection. She liked systems. She liked things to be clear. She noticed one morning that a name had been added to the company table, Sandra Whitfield, +1. She asked Garrett about it. Casually, just checking. He said Sandra was a key person on a deal they were closing. It would look strange to exclude her. The +1 was her boyfriend. Claire said, of course, no problem, and moved on. She didn't think about the fact that Garrett knew Sandra well enough to know she had a boyfriend to invite. She didn't think about the fact that he'd added the name himself, directly into the spreadsheet, bypassing the discussion process. She didn't think about any of it. She filed it under explainable and moved on. The water in the shower had gone cold. She hadn't noticed. She stood in it for another moment. There are so many things I didn't notice, she thought. So many things I decided not to notice. I built a whole cabinet system, label after labelable, explainable, explainable. She turned off the water. She stood dripping in the quiet bathroom. She looked at herself in the mirror. Round face, dark circles from bad sleep. Hair she kept meaning to trim, the curve of her belly visible even from the front. She looked at herself for a long time. I'm not going to do that anymore, she thought. No more filing cabinet. No more labels. She dried off, she got dressed. She ate breakfast standing at the kitchen counter and thought about timelines. About what she knew and when she must have known it, if she had let herself look. The universal realization moment arrived here. It arrived not as a dramatic revelation, but as a quiet accounting. She had to choose now between two kinds of difficulty. The difficulty of seeing clearly which was immediate and painful and humiliating in a specific private way, or the difficulty of continuing not to see which was comfortable and familiar and would cost her, slowly, everything. She had a daughter coming. A daughter who would watch how her mother moved through the world. A daughter who would learn what love was supposed to look like by watching what Claire accepted. That settled it. She picked up her phone. She called Douglas Reeves. The bridal shower was on Thursday. 5 days before that Thursday, Claire almost canceled it. She held her phone 3 times with Beth's name on the screen. 3 times she set it back down. She wasn't ready to cancel yet. She needed to see how things looked when everyone thought everything was normal. She needed data. And some part of her, the stubborn, tender, still hoping part, needed to know if she was wrong. She was not wrong, but she needed to see that too. The restaurant was in Westlake. Small and garden-adjacent, white tablecloths. Flowers Claire had chosen months ago, before she knew flowers would feel complicated. 22 women. Her mother Patrice, who had flown in from San Antonio with a suitcase too large for a weekend. Her Aunt Marlene from Corpus Christi, who drove 4 hours and arrived 10 minutes early. Beth, steady and bright in a yellow dress, positioned near the door like a lighthouse. It was a beautiful event. Claire stood in the middle of it and smiled. She had become very good at smiling. She moved through conversations. She admired the cake shaped like a bouquet, white and pale green. She drank her sparkling water and said how gorgeous and how thoughtful, and I love it with complete accuracy because all of those things were true. The gifts were thoughtful. The flowers were gorgeous. The people in this room loved her genuinely. She felt both completely present and slightly outside herself, like watching a performance from the wings. The gift opening had just started when Sandra Whitfield walked in. She was not on the guest list. Claire saw her the moment she crossed the threshold. Dark hair, straight posture, a dress that cost more than Claire's monthly car payment. She came in quietly, with the practiced ease of someone who has learned to enter rooms as though she belongs in them. She found a seat at the edge of the gathering, and then she looked at Claire and she smiled. Claire knew that smile, not from personal experience, from the specific ancient knowledge that women carry about the smiles of other women, the taxonomy of smiles, the one that means welcome, and the one that means I see you, and the one that means something else entirely. Sandra Whitfield's smile meant, I know something you don't, and I'm here to see how much you know. That was the smirk. The one the title promised, real and small and devastating. Claire held eye contact for exactly 1 second. Then she turned back to the gift in her hands. Soft yellow swaddle blankets, 4 of them perfectly folded. These are beautiful, she said to the woman who gave them. She's going to live in these. She meant it. She also did not lose track of Sandra Whitfield for a single moment. Beth appeared at her elbow 6 minutes later. She called Garrett, Beth murmured, close to her ear. I watched her step outside. 45 seconds. 45 seconds. Not long enough for any conversation that needed explaining. Just long enough for I'm here. She's here. She's a notification. That was what that call was. A notification delivered person to person. Claire kept opening gifts. She kept saying all the right things. Her hands were steady. Her mind was running very fast beneath the stillness. Why would he send her here? To see how Claire reacted. To take the temperature of the room. To find out what Claire knew. Or in this thought arrived cold and clear and reorganized several other things she had been turning over. Or Dolores sent her. Not Garrett, Dolores. The document. The timing. The way Dolores had called Claire's mother at the hotel, getting Patrice's cell number somehow, demonstrating reach. The controlled precision of all of it. What if the document on the table wasn't about money? What if it was a test? What if Dolores wanted to see whether I would fight or fold? The answer, apparently, was neither. The answer was, I'll gather information and decide for myself. Sandra Whitfield left 20 minutes before the party ended. Quietly, efficiently, without speaking to Claire directly, having accomplished whatever she came to accomplish. The goodbyes took another 30 minutes. Hugs and laughter, and her mother holding both her hands and saying, you look beautiful, baby girl. I'm so proud of you, with the specific, full-weight pride of a woman who means every word. Claire hugged her back. She meant that too, fully. She said goodbye to everyone. She walked to the parking lot. She got in her car. She sat. She didn't start the engine. This was the mirror technique moment of this chapter. Small and specific, and recognized by every woman who has ever sat in a parking lot unable to make herself go anywhere yet. Just sitting, just breathing, just letting the reality of the last 2 hours settle into something she could carry. I'm not crazy, she thought. I know what I saw. She said it aloud, just to give it weight, just to hear it in a voice she trusted. I'm not crazy, she said. I know what I saw. The smirk, the 45-second call, the document, the word yet, the photo from Uchi, the timeline she had built in her kitchen with Beth. All the pieces. Right there. She had been building something without knowing what it was. She knew now. She picked up her phone. She found the contact she'd saved 3 days ago. She called Douglas Reeves. He picked up on the third ring. Mr. Reeves, she said, this is Claire Nolan. I need to meet with you as soon as possible. I have documents I'd like you to review. Of course, he said. Can you come Monday morning? Yes, she said, 9 o'clock. I'll be there, she said. She started the car. She drove home. She was not shaking. Garrett came home at 7. He brought Gerber daisies. She was already in the kitchen when she heard his key in the door. She'd been sitting at the table going through the original prenuptial agreement side by side with the new document. A yellow legal pad beside her with notes in her precise small handwriting. She covered the documents with a dish towel before he came in. Not because she was hiding, because she wasn't ready for that conversation yet. She wanted to have a few more facts in hand first. He came in holding the flowers, orange and pink, cellophane. The price sticker still on the front. She trimmed the stems and put them in a vase. She had flowers everywhere now. The bridal shower had produced an abundance. How was the shower, he asked. Lovely, she said. Everyone came. She turned from the counter. She looked at him directly. Sandra Whitfield came, she said. The thing that moved across his face arrived and left in under a second, but she saw it. That's strange, he said. Did someone invite her? She wasn't on the list. Huh, he nodded slowly. That's weird. I'll talk to her. You know her well enough to have a conversation about her attendance at my bridal shower. He stopped nodding. We work together. It's a small team. The photo from the promotion dinner, Claire said. The one she posted 6 weeks ago. Were you there in a professional capacity or a personal one? Silence. The specific silence of a man who has been caught and is choosing his approach. She knew both of Garrett's modes. She had studied them without realizing she was studying them. Mode 1, deflection. Mode 2, counteroffense. He always tried deflection first. It was a work event, he said. You weren't wearing your bracelet. He looked down at his wrist. The silver bracelet was there now. He touched it briefly. I take it off sometimes at work, he said. The class gets caught on things. Okay, she said. Claire, what is this actually about? There it was. The pivot to counteroffense. What do you mean, she said. You're asking me about a work dinner like it means something. Are you? He paused. Are you going to do this a week and a half before the wedding? You're stressed. I understand that. But starting arguments over a bracelet isn't healthy. I'm not arguing, she said. Her voice was completely calm. I'm having a conversation. Those are different things. He looked at her. She looked at him. The kitchen was very quiet. He never loved me, she thought. Not clearly. Not completely. He loved having me. He loved that I made things smooth and organized and quiet. He loved the life I helped him build. But me, the actual person, Claire Elizabeth Nolan, with her yellow legal pads and her marigolds and her precise handwriting he never fully saw. She didn't say any of that. She said, tell me when your mother first discussed adding the controlling interest clause to our prenuptial agreement. Claire, we've been through this. I know we have, I'm asking it again. He sat down at the table. He rubbed the back of his neck. He looked like a man who was very tired of being asked questions he doesn't want to answer. Several months ago, he said, when she was working with her estate attorney, before or after I got pregnant. The question landed. She watched it land. He was quiet for 3 full seconds. Around the same time, he said carefully, so your mother began restructuring documents related to our marriage at the same time you learned you were going to be a father. He said nothing. And in those same months, Claire continued, Sandra Whitfield received a promotion at your company and began appearing in photographs in contexts that aren't professional. You're connecting things that Garrett. Her voice was still even, still calm. Something steady had moved into her and taken up residence. I'm a bookkeeper. Connecting things is my entire job. I look at numbers that don't belong together and I find the pattern. I've been not doing that in my personal life for 3 years. I'm doing it now. He put his face in his hands, just for a moment, just briefly. Then he looked up. Claire, I don't want to. Your mother called my mother at her hotel, Claire said. He went still. She got Patrice's cell number somehow, Claire continued. She called her this afternoon. She wants to meet tomorrow morning to discuss what's best for Garrett and the baby. He was very quiet. Did you know she was going to do that? She mentioned she might reach out to. Did you tell her to? No. Did you tell her not to? He didn't answer, and that was the answer. She picked up her tea from the counter. She walked to the bedroom. She closed the door. The click of it was soft and final in the quiet house. She did not sleep. She lay in the dark and listened to Garrett's breathing change as he fell under. How does he sleep, she wondered. How does a person sleep? She lay still and counted what she knew. The document was real. The clause was real. Not standard, she'd confirmed that. Sandra Whitfield came to her bridal shower uninvited. Called Garrett within minutes of arriving. Smiled at Claire with the specific quality of a woman who knows where she stands. Something had been happening for at least 8 months, possibly longer. Her daughter was due in 2 months. The wedding was in 9 days. She counted and recounted these things the way she counted reconciling entries in a difficult ledger, making sure everything added up, making sure nothing was missing. And when she was sure she had all the numbers correct, she made a decision. She made it quietly, in the dark, while her fiancé slept beside her. She made it the way she made all her important decisions, carefully, based on evidence, with no dramatics. I'm going to protect myself, she thought, and I'm going to protect her. She put her hand on her belly. The baby was still, just present, warm and present. I know, Claire told her silently. I know I've got us. The anger did not arrive loudly. It never did with Claire. It arrived the way a tide comes in, slow and inevitable, and then suddenly you look down and the water is at your waist. It came in full on a Wednesday morning when Beth called and said, I talked to Nora Sims. Claire set down her coffee. Tell me. She left the company 8 months ago, Beth said. She said the environment had become uncomfortable. A senior executive was her word territorial about Sandra in ways that weren't appropriate for a professional setting. Claire was quiet. She didn't say Garrett's name, Beth added. She didn't have to. 8 months ago. 8 months ago. There's something else, Beth said. I asked about the promotion photo. Nora said the promotion happened 8 months ago, not 6 weeks ago. The photo Sandra posted recently was from a dinner they had months after the promotion. It wasn't a celebration of anything specific. It was just a dinner. Just a dinner. Just a dinner that Sandra chose to post weeks before Claire's wedding. Posted and tagged and hashtagged with a caption that said celebrating a promotion when the promotion was already 8 months old. Why would you post that now, Claire thought, unless someone asked you to? Unless it was a message. Unless someone wanted Claire to know, or to wonder. Unless Dolores Harmon wanted to see exactly how much Claire was paying attention. The tide was at her chest now. She breathed through it. There's more, Beth said. I'm sorry, Claire. Tell me. Nora ran into a mutual friend last week. Someone who knows Sandra socially. And apparently Beth paused. The deliberate pause of someone choosing words carefully. Apparently Sandra was told that the pregnancy was not planned. That Garrett was figuring out how to handle the situation. The words landed with a physical quality. Handle the situation. Her daughter. Her 7-month-old daughter who kicked and rolled and said hello with her whole body. Her daughter who was going to be named Rosalie, who was going to have Claire's crooked smile, who was going to grow up knowing she was wanted. Handle the situation. She was absolutely still for a long moment. Then she said, "Thank you, Beth. Claire, I'm all right. I'll call you tonight." She set the phone down. She sat at the kitchen table with her hands flat on the surface. The anger was fully in her chest now. Clean and hot and specific. Not at Sandra. Not really. At the systematic, calculated management of her life. The document, the lawyer, the clause, Sandra at the shower, the phone call to her mother. And underneath all of it, Garrett not a villain exactly. Not a man who twirled his mustache and calculated cruelty, just a man who had never been brave enough to choose and so had let the women around him make all his choices for him while he brought grocery store flowers and called it caring. She was furious. She let herself be. She sat at the table and let the fury move through her like weather. Let it be what it was. Let it inform her without controlling her. This was important. This mattered. Because the fury was actually information. It was her body telling her, this is wrong. You know it's wrong. You've known for a long time. After several minutes, she stood. She went to the nursery. She stood in the doorway of the green room with the white crib and the loose slat on the rocking chair. She looked at it. I am going to fix that slat, she thought. Today, I'm going to find a YouTube video and I'm going to fix it myself. She took out her phone. She looked it up. It took her 23 minutes and a Phillips head screwdriver she found in the junk drawer. When the chair was solid and still beneath her, she sat in it. She rocked, no wobble, just the rhythm of it, back and forth. Good, she thought. One thing fixed. She picked up her phone again. She texted Garrett, I need you to come home at a reasonable time tonight. We need to talk. He replied within a minute, of course. Is everything okay? She looked at the message. She thought about how to answer it. She typed, I'm fine. We just need to talk. She sent it. She put the phone in her pocket. She went to make lunch. Garrett came home at 6:30, on time.
Careful.
The watchfulness of a man who knows a reckoning is coming. She was in the kitchen. She had made dinner. An actual dinner, roast chicken, vegetables, the kind of meal that takes time and attention. She had needed something to do with her hands. Smells great, he said. Sit down, she said. He sat. She brought the food to the table. She served it. She sat across from him. She let him take a few bites before she said, I know about you and Sandra. He set down his fork. I don't mean I suspect, she said. I mean I know. I know it has been happening for at least 8 months. I know you told her the pregnancy wasn't planned. I know you used the phrase handle the situation. And I know that Sandra attending my bridal shower was not an accident. He was white. She watched the blood leave his face. Claire, I'm not asking you to explain, she said. I don't need an explanation. I need you to understand that I know, and that I've been gathering information for several days, and that I have met with an attorney. He stood up, then sat back down, like he couldn't decide which direction to go. You met with Douglas Reeves, she said, Tuesday morning. He's reviewed both versions of the prenuptial agreement. And he's informed me of my rights in the current situation, which I want to be very clear, I have not signed anything. My finances are entirely separate. We have no joint legal assets. He stared at her. She ate a bite of chicken. It was good chicken. She was glad she'd made it. Claire, he said again, just her name, like he didn't know what words came after it. I want to talk to you about our daughter, she said, because she is the thing that matters most. Whatever has happened between us, and I'm not minimizing it, I'm setting it aside for a moment. She is going to arrive in 2 months, and she deserves 2 parents who are honest with each other about what they're able to offer. He was quiet for a long moment. I never meant for any of this. I know, she said. And she did know. She believed him. He was not a man who sat down one day and planned deception. He was a man who let things happen because confronting them required courage he didn't have. He let his mother make decisions. He let Sandra fill a space that should have been empty. He let Claire believe everything was fine because believing it himself was easier than telling the truth. That didn't make it less. But it made him human, which was somehow harder. What do you want? He asked. His voice was rough, genuinely. She looked at him across the table. She told him she did not sleep that night. Garrett had gone to the guest room after dinner. Not asked to. He just went, and she didn't stop him. The quiet of the bedroom was something she needed. She lay in the dark. She counted. Not numbers this time. Not dates or patterns or financial discrepancies. She counted the things she had loved. The laugh, the real laugh at the rooftop party that first night. She hadn't imagined it. It was real. The way he drove 2 hours in a rainstorm to help her friend move apartments because Claire asked. He didn't know the friend. He just came. That was real too. The night her grandmother died when she called him at 2 in the morning, and he picked up on the second ring and stayed on the phone for 3 hours without once saying maybe you should sleep. Real. All of it real. The man who contained those things was a real man. He also contained the other things. Both versions were true. She lay in the dark and understood for the first time with full clarity that this was the hardest part of leaving someone you loved. Not the betrayal, not the anger. The grief for what was genuine inside what was broken. She cried. Finally. Completely, not loudly. Just a sustained private grief. The kind that acknowledges something was real and good and is now unambiguously over. When she was done, she wiped her face with her sleeve. She lay still. Outside, a car passed. Then silence. The 3 in the morning silence of the whole world asleep while you are wide awake with yourself. She picked up her phone. She opened the Notes app. She typed, just for herself, I deserved better than this. She read it. She typed underneath, my daughter deserves better than this. She read both lines. She closed the app. She put the phone face down. She stared at the ceiling. The deep vulnerability layer had been waiting for this moment. Not the fury that was energy, that was movement. This was the underneath. The part you only reach after you've processed everything else. I was invisible, she thought. Somewhere along the way I became invisible. He looked at me every day and he didn't really see me. And I was so busy making things work, making things smooth, making things organized and functional, and fine I didn't notice that I had stopped being seen. She lay with that. She breathed through it. At 4 in the morning she got up. She went to the nursery. She didn't turn the light on. She sat in the rocking chair, the fixed one, the steady one in the dark. She put her hands on her belly. The baby moved, a slow, deliberate roll. I know, Claire whispered. I know, I know. She sat in the dark and rocked and let herself be in the reality of her life, exactly as it was. Not the life she had imagined, not the wedding in 11 days. Not the family she had been constructing in her head for 3 years. The actual life. The real one. The one where she was sitting alone in a dark room at 4 in the morning, 7 months pregnant, having just confirmed that the man in the guest room was not the man she thought he was. She let herself feel how big that was. She let it be big. She didn't try to organize it or file it or make it manageable. She just sat in it, and after a while something shifted. Not dramatically, not a lightning bolt. Just a slow, quiet settling, like things finding their right level. I'm still here, she realized. I'm sitting in this chair, I fixed myself, and I'm still here, and my daughter is still coming, and my name is still mine, and my accounts are still mine, and my work is still mine, and my marigolds are still mine. Everything I was before this relationship, everything that was mine before I started explaining things away, that's still here. That was not nothing. That was actually everything. She made tea at 5 in the morning. She stood at the kitchen window and watched the sky change. First the dark, then that particular gray at the edges of things. Then a strip of pink, tentative and specific, along the east. The world was still happening. She thought that was right. She thought about her mother's divorce. She was 12 when her father left. Not dramatically. He just gradually stopped being present, and then one day he wasn't there. Her mother did not cry in front of her. But Claire heard her through the wall on the nights when Patrice thought everyone was asleep. She had sworn at 12 years old that she would never be in a marriage where she cried through walls. She had not been in that marriage. She had stopped it before it started. She drank her tea. She watched the pink deepen along the horizon. She made toast. She sat at the table and ate it and felt underneath the grief and the anger and the exhaustion something she had not felt in weeks. Clarity. The specific, clean feeling of a woman who knows exactly what she is dealing with and is no longer pretending otherwise. One step at a time, she told herself. One thing at a time. She wrote a list. Not dramatic, not a declaration. Just the next few concrete things. She had already done several of them. She added what remained. When the list was complete, she looked at it. It was a good list. Thorough and sequenced and specific. She was, above all else, a woman who made good lists. She folded it and put it in her pocket. She went to get ready for Monday. Douglas Reeves' office was on the 4th floor of a building near the courthouse. Clean lines, no clutter. The kind of office that says competence through the absence of unnecessary things. He stood when Claire came in. He was 54, precise, with a handshake that communicated steady more than forceful. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. Thank you for seeing me on short notice, Claire said. Of course. He sat. How are you feeling? She touched her belly briefly. Fine, tired, understandably. He folded his hands. Tell me where we are. She laid it out, all of it, sequence precise, no unnecessary detail, no missing detail. The document, the clause, Beth's discovery, Sandra at the bridal shower, Nora's information, the timeline. She spoke for 11 minutes without stopping. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. The controlling interest clause, he said, is challengeable under Texas Family Code if it was presented without adequate independent legal representation for the non-drafting party. Since you haven't signed it, I haven't signed anything, she confirmed. Then we're in a good position. He leaned forward slightly. I'd like to look at both documents. Do you have them? She opened her bag. She had printed everything, organized by date, labeled with the yellow tabs she used for her own client files. She placed it on his desk. He looked at the stack, then at her. You're very prepared, he said. It's what I do, she said. He reviewed the documents. He asked 3 clarifying questions. She answered all 3 accurately and without hesitation. At the end of the meeting, he set down his pen. What do you want the outcome to be, he asked. She had been thinking about this question for 3 days. I want to protect my daughter's financial future, she said. And I want to be clear about what I'm walking away from and what I'm keeping. You're not married yet, he noted. No, the prenuptial agreement hasn't been signed. No, there are no joint legal assets, no. My name is on the lease here. His name is on his mortgage. Our accounts are entirely separate. He nodded slowly. Then what you're actually facing, he said, is a decision about whether to proceed. Yes, and if you decide not to proceed, the legal exposure is very limited. Yes, the child? She's mine, Claire said, simply, without drama. I'll file for support through proper channels. I'm not afraid of that process. He looked at her for a moment. Something in his expression settled. All right, he said. I'll put some things in writing for you. And I'd suggest, if you haven't already, reviewing your personal financial accounts for any changes in the past 8 months. She had already done this. Everything was clean, untouched, exactly as she had maintained it. The one thing Garrett had not gotten to was her money, because she had never combined it with his. She had offered to early in the engagement. He said, let's wait until after the wedding. She had thought he was being careful. She understood now what he had been waiting for. She thanked Douglas Reeves and shook his hand. She left. Nora Sims was waiting in the lobby. Claire stopped. Nora was 38, medium height, direct posture. The look of a woman who had been sitting with something uncomfortable for a while and had finally decided to just say it. I asked Beth to let me know when your meeting was, Nora said. I'm sorry to ambush you. 5 minutes. That's all I need, Claire studied her. Okay, she said. They found a bench in the small courtyard outside. A palm tree, a little fountain, the ordinary Monday morning world going on around them. Nora sat forward with her elbows on her knees. I left that company because of what I saw happening, she said. I told myself it was one-sided, that Sandra was pursuing him and he wasn't encouraging it. I used that story because it was easier. And now, Claire said, now I know it wasn't one-sided. Nora looked at her directly. I found out recently that he told Sandra the pregnancy wasn't planned, that he was working out how to handle things, and that his mother was managing the details. His mother was managing the details. Everything locked into place. The document, the timing, Sandra at the shower, the call to Patrice at the hotel. Not just Dolores being protective of her son, not just Garrett being a weak man. Coordinated management of a situation. Claire was the situation. Does Sandra know what Dolores has been doing? Claire asked. Nora hesitated. I don't think she knows the specifics. I think she believed Garrett was about to end the engagement. I think the shower was her way of checking whether I was a threat. Yes, and Dolores sent her. Another pause. I think they know each other. I think Dolores and Sandra have spoken at some point. Yes, there it was. Not a conspiracy exactly. Not a movie plot. Just 2 women with different agendas loosely aligned around the same goal. Each with her own version of the plan. Each managing a man who could not manage himself. Claire looked at the courtyard, the little fountain, the palm tree, the ordinary world. Thank you for telling me, she said. I should have said something sooner. You said something now, Claire said. That counts. She spent the next 48 hours doing quiet, decisive things. This was the quiet strength layer, not confrontation. Competence. She called the venue. She spoke to the coordinator, a calm woman named Lynette who had clearly navigated this kind of conversation before. The venue could hold the deposit as a credit for 12 months, transferable to a family member if needed. She called the florist. She called the caterer. She called the photographer, who was a friend, who said without prompting, whatever you need, Claire, I'm on your side. She drafted the email to the guests with Beth. They sat at the kitchen table for an hour getting the tone right. Not dramatic, not defensive. Clear. Claire Nolan and Garrett Harmon have mutually decided to postpone the wedding. We are grateful for your love and support. Further details will follow. She pressed send. She closed the laptop. She made herself a cup of tea. She sat at the table and drank it while it was still hot. She noted this. A small thing. The tea was still hot because she had stopped rushing. She had stopped managing 17 things at once. She was sitting here, in this kitchen, with 1 cup of tea, doing one thing. It felt strange, and it felt right. She told him that evening. He came home to find her at the kitchen table. No documents this time, no legal pads, Just her and her tea, and the daisies he'd brought 3 days ago still alive, barely in the vase by the window. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She looked at him. "I've contacted the wedding venue," she said, "and the vendors. I've sent an email to the guests." He stared at her. "What?" "I've postponed the wedding," she said. "I made those calls and sent that email before this conversation because I wanted to be sure the decision was made before we talked about it. I didn't want it to become a negotiation. Claire, without even... I made a decision about my own life," she said. "I was entitled to." He stood up, sat back down, like he couldn't find the right response and kept cycling through options. "Because of Sandra," he said. "Because of several things," she said. "Sandra, the document. The way this engagement has been managed by your mother in ways I was never informed about. The way you have been managing me, not cruelly, Garrett. I don't think you're a cruel man. But the way you've been letting me believe something that wasn't entirely true." He put his hands flat on the table, like he needed the surface for steadiness. "Claire, I am sorry. I know that doesn't... I know you are," she said. And she did know. She could see it, the genuine weight of it. The specific, haggard look of a man who has been running from a reckoning that has now finally arrived. "I believe you're sorry," she said. "But sorry isn't the answer to the question. The question is what we do now for our daughter." "I want to be part of her life," he said immediately. "Good. Then we're going to handle this reasonably. Douglas Reeves is going to be in touch about a co-parenting arrangement. I'd like us to be adults about it. I think we both want what's best for her." "Of course," he said. "And then you've already talked to an attorney about co-parenting." "Yes." He looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression. Something real and underneath the deflection. Something that looked, if she had to name it, like recognition. "I underestimated her," his expression said. "I have been underestimating her from the beginning." She had been a variable he thought he understood. A manageable element in a situation being managed by his mother. He had not understood that she was the only adult in the room. "I'm going to stay at my mother's hotel tonight," Claire said. "I'll be back on Saturday for my things. I'd like you to be somewhere else when I come." He nodded. "Okay." She stood. She picked up her purse. Her overnight bag was already by the door. She had packed it that morning. She walked toward the back door. She paused at the threshold. "The rosebush is going to need water this week," she said. "Every other day. It's been dry." She left. Dolores Harm called 2 hours later. Claire was at the hotel with her mother, both of them sitting on the beds with takeout containers between them. She answered. "Claire," Dolores said. "Dolores." A long pause, the calibrating kind. "I did not expect you to move as quickly as you did," Dolores said. It was not an apology. It was acknowledgement. A woman who understood power recognizing it where she hadn't anticipated finding it. "I expect most people don't," Claire said. "The document was meant to begin a negotiation," Dolores said. "You expected me to argue or comply," Claire said. "You didn't expect me to gather information and make my own decision on my own timeline." Silence. "No," Dolores said. "I didn't." "I understand why you did what you did," Claire said. "You were protecting your son and your assets. I understand that motivation." She paused. "But I want you to understand something. My daughter is going to be raised to know what she's worth, and I will not be teaching her that lesson from inside a marriage where I was never the first priority." Dolores was quiet for a very long time. "Garrett made his choices," she said finally. "I want what's best for the child." "So do I," Claire said. "We agree on something. That's a start." She ended the call. Her mother looked at her from across the takeout containers. "How do you feel?" Patrice said. Claire thought about it. "Like something that was very heavy has been set down," she said. "I keep waiting for the ground to feel less solid, but it doesn't." Patrice reached over and squeezed her hand. "That's because the ground was always solid," she said. "You just couldn't feel it when you were carrying all of that." Claire looked at their hands together. She thought, "I am going to be all right. I am going to be more than all right, not immediately, not without hard days, but eventually and truly and completely." She believed it. That was new. The day the wedding was supposed to happen was a Saturday in late September. Claire woke at 7:15 in her mother's house in San Antonio. The same childhood bedroom. Same twin bed with a slight depression on the left side. Same water stain on the ceiling she used to stare at during high school when her mind was full of things she didn't know how to say. She lay there and took inventory. She expected grief. She was prepared for it. She had thought she might wake on this particular morning and find something devastating waiting for her. What she found instead was silence. The specific silence of a life that has stopped bracing for impact. She breathed into it, in and out. The room was cool. The light was soft. She could hear her mother downstairs moving through the kitchen, the comfortable sounds of Patrice Linwood organizing the morning. She put her hand on her belly. The baby rolled. "Good morning to you too," Claire said. Beth had driven down the night before. She was asleep in the guest room, having refused to let Claire be alone on this day. Claire had let her without arguing because some offers you just accept. By 9 they were all three at the kitchen table. Claire, Beth, Patrice, real breakfast. eggs and toast and fresh fruit and the good orange juice. Patrice had put flowers on the table, something alive and uncomplicated. Tell me how you actually feel, Beth said. I feel like I made the right decision, Claire said. That's the cognitive answer. It's also the true one. I'm asking about what's underneath the cognitive answer. Claire held her coffee cup. She thought about it honestly. I feel like I got something back, she said. I'm not sure exactly what to call it. Something that was mine before it became ours. Or whatever we were calling ourselves. Yourself, Patrice said simply. Maybe. Claire looked into her cup. Also, my hands have stopped shaking. Beth looked at her hands. They were shaking since I saw the document. I didn't mention it. Claire. I didn't want to alarm anyone unnecessarily. Beth put her hand over hers. You can alarm me. I was made for it. Claire almost smiled, then smiled completely. And it was real. Not performed. Not covering anything. Just her face doing what her face did when something was genuinely good. The day unfolded the way a Saturday should when you're not spending it in a ceremony. A slow morning. A walk through the neighborhood a little long for 7 months pregnant. Her back complaining by the end. But the air was cool and clear, and the live oaks along the street threw good shade. She called her Aunt Marlene in Corpus Christi, who said exactly the right thing. I support you completely and I want to take you to lunch next week. She sat in the backyard in the afternoon sun and finished a novel she had been meaning to finish for 2 months. She took a nap. When she woke up, the light through the window was golden. Late afternoon, her mother was in the kitchen. Beth had gone home. She lay in the golden light and thought about something Douglas Reeves had said. It takes a particular kind of self-possession to remove yourself from a situation before it becomes legally complicated. Most people wait until after. She hadn't planned it that way. She had just understood, once she allowed herself to look clearly, that she could not unknow what she knew. The pretending had its limits. She had finally found them. 2 months later, Rosalie was born. 8 pounds, 2 ounces. A head of dark hair, the nurses said it sometimes fell out and sometimes didn't. Eyes so dark they looked black in the first days, though they would lighten later. She arrived at 6:43 in the morning, during a rainstorm, at a hospital on the south side of San Antonio where Patrice had already introduced herself to half the staff. Claire held her and thought, hello, I've been waiting. Beth was there. Her mother was there. Aunt Marlene had driven up and was asleep in the waiting room with her coat over her face. Garrett was there too, in the waiting room. He had asked carefully if he could be present. Claire said yes. Not because she had forgiven everything. Forgiveness was its own process, moving at its own pace, but because Rosalie deserved to have him there from the beginning. He cried when the nurse brought her out. Real tears. The same real quality as that real laugh at the rooftop party. She was glad she let him be there. The recovery was not linear. Nothing important is. There were hard days. Days when Claire cried in the car on the way home from Rosalie's pediatric appointments because she was doing something she hadn't planned to do alone. Days when Rosalie was up at 3 in the morning and the tiredness was so large it pressed on the edges of everything. But there were other days. Days when Rosalie smiled and it was her own smile. Claire's, wide and crooked on the left side, and Claire would think, there you are. There is the whole reason. She went back to work at 14 weeks. Part-time first, then full. Her clients had waited for her. 2 new ones called in November. By January, she was running her books again and thinking, just beginning to think, about what it might look like to take on a partner and expand. She found an apartment, small, a yard, good light in the kitchen. She planted marigolds. She planted zinnias. She took a cutting from her mother's rosebush and brought it home in a clay pot and set it by the back fence. She fixed the rocking chair slat. 20 minutes. A Phillips head screwdriver. A YouTube video. She was disproportionately proud of this. She told Beth and Beth laughed and said, you fixed a chair and canceled a wedding in the same month. You're basically invincible. I postponed, Claire said. You know what you did, Beth said. She did. The Freedom Win arrived in November. She was updating her personal information forms from a new client intake. Emergency contact. She typed Beth Caldwell without thinking about it. Looked at the name, realized what she'd done. Realized it was right. She hadn't removed Garrett from her emergency contacts. She had simply automatically stopped thinking of him as the person she'd call. She updated the form. She filed it. She moved on. A small administrative action. Profound reorientation. The success win arrived in January. She signed the lease on her own office. Small suite, 2nd floor. A window that looked out at a live oak. The rent was reasonable. The light was good. She bought a plant for the windowsill. She watered it on Tuesdays and Fridays. She kept it alive. The truth win arrived in the spring. Nora Sims ran into Sandra Whitfield at a professional conference in Dallas. She texted Claire afterward. Sandra, it seemed, had had the experience of discovering that the promises made to her were also conditional. That Dolores Harmon's management of the situation had ultimately extended to managing Sandra as well. That being chosen over someone else does not mean being truly chosen. Claire read the message. She sat with it. She did not feel triumphant. She felt tired and a little sad for all of them. For herself and Sandra, and even for Garrett, the sad you feel for someone you've stopped being angry at, which is the sadder kind. But she also thought, good, now she knows. Now she gets to choose what she does with knowing. Garrett showed up. Not in the way she'd feared he might, dramatic, demanding, complicated. He showed up the way decent people show up when they understand they've done damage and want to be useful. Thursdays, Rosalie stayed with him. Sunday afternoons, he was attentive, he was present. He did not bring his mother to pickups without asking first. He was better in some ways as a father than she had expected. She gave him credit for that when she could, for Rosalie's sake, for the long game. On an evening in late May, she took Rosalie to the park. Rosalie was 4 months old and entirely unmoved by nature, but she tolerated the outing with an expression of profound assessment. She was a person who took her time deciding what she thought about things. She gets that from me, Claire thought, pleased. They sat on a bench near the fountain. Other families moved around them. Dogs, children, the ordinary evening world. A woman sat down at the other end of the bench, visibly pregnant, maybe 6 months. Tired in the specific way of a woman who has been managing too much for too long. She looked at Rosalie. How old? She asked. 4 months, Claire said. Does it get easier? The wisdom moment. Arriving here naturally without being engineered. Claire looked at this woman, the tired eyes, the hand on her belly, the question behind the question. Some parts get harder, she said honestly, and some parts get genuinely surprisingly easier. And some mornings you wake up and feel something that isn't quite happiness but is close to it. And you think this is enough, this exact thing. This is enough. The woman nodded slowly. They sat in comfortable quiet for a moment. The fountain played. A child ran past laughing about something. A dog chased a ball and missed. Rosalie made a sound. A small, satisfied sound. Like someone who has just identified what they were looking for. Claire looked down at her daughter. Rosalie looked up at her mother. Dark eyes, wide. Already organizing the world into categories. Already figuring out what was worth her attention. Hello, Claire thought. I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad we did this right. She does not wonder much now what the wedding would have been like. She tried it once. A Wednesday night when she couldn't sleep and her mind wandered. 214 guests, the Hill Country venue. The flowers she spent 4 months choosing. She couldn't make the picture stay still. Because in the image, she could feel herself smiling, and she knew what that smile would have been covering. And she was done, completely. Finally and permanently done with the work of covering things. She could smile freely now. She could sit in a kitchen at 5 in the morning drinking hot tea. She could fix rocking chairs and water plants and sign leases and trust what she knew. She could look at herself in the mirror and recognize the woman she saw. That woman was not starting over. That woman was starting correctly. For the first time, she drives home from the park with Rosalie asleep in the car seat. The evening is warm. The streets are quiet. The radio plays something low and unhurried. She carries Rosalie inside. She stands over the crib. The room is green and white and exact as she planned it. The window is open. The evening air moves through. She leans down. She puts her lips against Rosalie's forehead. So gently. She whispers, you are not a situation. You are never a situation. You are the entire point. She straightens. She goes to the kitchen. She makes herself dinner. Something real. Something she enjoys. Not the fastest thing, the right thing. She eats at the table. She looks out at the yard. The marigolds are coming in. Orange and gold and yellow. Pushing up through the dark soil with the specific, uncomplicated insistence of things that know they belong where they are. She looks at them for a long time. She takes a breath. In and out. And something that is not quite happiness but is very close to it. Something that has been building in her chest all these months. Quiet and small and very steady expands. Just a little. Just enough. This, she thinks. This is it. This is enough.